It's funny. People always talk about representation, but then don't care about falsely representing an actual historical figure. Hey, what's going on, Nerd Fam? This is your boy Gashan. I want to welcome you to Enter the Nerd. All right, so I actually wanted to make this particular video for a while, but things just kept popping up and kept on adding to this. So before more things add to this particular topic, I want to get this out of the way. And it's kind of two-pronged. So the first thing is about historical figures who are white being represented as, let's just say for this particular video, as black, even though we know that's not what they were, right? Or at least some people don't believe that they were, right? That's what some of the people are claiming. And this is all in the name of what they call representation, which on its face is, hey, let's just make sure if a story takes place in modern day, that it looks like what it looks like in modern day. And I get it, but the context of when and where something takes place changes what groups of people would be represented. So if it takes place in, let's just say, Norway during like the height of like the Viking era, it's probably going to look a certain way by way of demographics, right? If it takes place in West Africa a couple thousand years ago, the people would look a certain way. It wouldn't be this melting pot of people, right? Because that's not what Ghana looked like, let's just say 800 years ago. So we understand context, at least I think we do. Let me know if I've lost you there, right? So recently we've had Cleopatra, right? She is now being portrayed as, let's just say, being black phenotypically. Even though historically she isn't, she's actually Greek. She's of a particular dynasty that actually participated in incest to make sure it stayed Greek. And there are actual native Egyptian princesses they probably could have gone with, but instead there's like an obsession with Cleopatra because apparently she was supposed to be beautiful. But then actually when you look at a lot of historical accounts and even some of the busts they make of her face, she's not really all that. And she definitely doesn't have like classically African or even North African phenotypes. She just doesn't, right? She looks Greek because that's what she was. But people want to be like, oh, well, they're always taking everything from Egypt. So let's compartmentalize. We're talking about her in general, right? But this is not the only, this is just the latest. What's happened before this? We have Anne Boleyn, who we know exactly what she looked like and who is she being portrayed as in the series with her, right? Now, I actually was going to make this video after I watched this Vikings, I think it was Vikings Valhalla, right? And they had this lady there who clearly looked like she was of African descent, like, or maybe like of mixed descent. And I go, okay, I didn't know somebody like this existed in history. So I went to look up her character or her, pardon me, like the person that I thought that she was. And it turns out she's race and gender swapped from an actual figure. It was like Jarl Hakon or something like that. What was the need in literally race swapping a historical figure? History is what it is by way of that geography and the demographics that happen to have been there at that time. Why do we feel the need to do this? Why are we so obsessed with doing stuff like this? And mind you, I like Scandinavian lore. I like Eastern Asian lore, Southeast Asian lore. I said law, what was that about? Lore. I love African lore, all of it. But let's touch on that African lore, right? Why is it that people are not they're not being a champion of showing a continent that is pretty much untouched by way of history? West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa. There are so many empires and warriors and kings and queens that have really contributed huge things, not by way to the continent, but even by way of trade and establishing relationships outside the continent historically that we're not speaking about. And that's obviously two-pronged. That's one, the people, the production studios don't see it as profitable and they're not going to go ahead and do it themselves. But two, it's because the audiences are okay with the Anne Boleyn swaps and what's happening with Cleopatra. And they're not even interested in hearing about all these other African kings and queens that are not in Egypt, but places like Mali, Benin, Kush, ancient Ethiopia, which would have been Aksum. And there were tons of queens. They had warrior queens there from Nigeria, the founder of Yoruba land, and the language that was there. Tons of people that were actually from Mali, like Mansa Musa, for example, and the dude that actually founded the ancient Mali Empire. There were actual women who did really cool things in terms of battle, leading cavalry themselves, also doing strategic plans that helped, I believe, Angola fight the Portuguese. There was a queen that helped Ghana fight British rule. Even there was one in Kush. She was like a Kush queen, a Kushite queen, pardon me, who was fighting the Romans at the time. She had like one eye and like she was like favored by her fathers and stuff like that because she understood historical and military strategy more than her brothers. It was really, really cool. So you have tons of women. Like, you don't have to make up any women. They're all there. And they're also like warriors and awesome stuff that we have that are men that are in all parts of Africa. Why is this so important? Because number one, Africa has literally every phenotype in it, and every part of geography in it, every plane of geography, I'll say. So that means you can literally do like an anthology series on like African empires, and they don't look the same at all. Why is it important that these things see the light of day? One, they dispel so many narratives. Like for some reason, like Africans did not leave the continent until slavery, which a lot of people think, but it's not true, because when you look at like across the Mediterranean, look in Greece, you look at stuff like that, there's literally, they have ancient currency being exchanged. Specifically, if you look at like in Ethiopia, I believe his name was Izana. I might be saying his name wrong, but he was the first like Ethiopian king to embrace Christianity, and then another one who like he minted like he's like the earliest African to have his own currency, like to put his face on currency. And that same currency is in Greece right now. Like they have it there like from like thousands of years ago. So clearly they were trading and they were talking to each other for a very long time. And they find journals of them speaking of each other in a light that's not adversarial. So once you get a chance to talk about those things, you go, okay, so people were not like operating like they do in the last 200 and 300 years, which was under a racial base. Did people still fight? Yes, they did. But people also traded and got along, and no, they didn't all look alike, right? And there's another narrative that a lot of people don't like, specifically people who are in favor of all the race swapping stuff, which is, oh my God, Africa was like this wonderland of just like everyone getting along before slavery. Then that's when they started, no, like every other empire in history, there was tons of infighting. There's all these different tribes. People were fighting over resources, petty stuff. It didn't matter. And yes, there was slavery, all types of things that were happening to people who were on the losing end of fights that were pretty disgusting. So when you see history, you get a chance to see that all these people are capable of great things and ugly things. You go, wow, we're all the same. We just got different cultures that are just as beautiful that we can be entertained and be astonished by. But for some reason, everyone is just jumping over the entire continent of Africa, or just like pinpointing, let's just talk about Egypt. And that's just one place. But there are so many empires, so many people that we have yet to discover. And it doesn't have to, and the last thing I want to say, pardon me, Black people or just Africans do not have to only be looked at, like when they're put on screen, doesn't have to be looked at through like the scope of race. Because every time they do have a movie that's made by the West, that's about Africans, it's about like, oh, but how do they interact on a racial base with like slave traders, i.e. the Woman King and so many other things before. It could just be people dealing with each other positively and negatively based off of what their motivations are for their empire, for their family. Do they want those resources? Is it a religious thing? Because they were, different faiths that were also there. And they also had different mythology, which is also something else. Talk about all these different nations didn't believe in the same gods. They all had their own mythology, which is also largely unexplored, to be honest. I mean, we see like Norse mythology, we see Greek mythology, we see all these things, but what about the African stuff? Let's explore that and make that available for everyone to see and really enjoy. It's crazy to me how like the most popular African like hero or character is from like a fictional African nation in Black Panther, right? Meanwhile, there's some really like dope, cool historical figures that you'd be like, damn, that person existed? Yeah, they did. And then some people will go like, well, the reason why we do all the race swapping is so, Black people can actually have, some roles. So you think that by switching Anne Boleyn to Black, that fixes the role problem versus having an entire production make a series take place in Africa? Wouldn't that create more opportunities by your logic, right? So why wouldn't we just go with that stuff? We see all this other mythology and we're enthralled by it. So why don't we hammer home more for the African mythology? These real people, the real figures, these real events that actually took place. I think Vikings is a really good way to be able to do it. Like if the History Channel just took like a particular period, made it 85% factual and 15%, just the sexy stuff to make it like not boring. Because sometimes if you go straight to the history, there are some things where it might be a little bit dry. So you got to add in some sexy stuff just to make people want to watch it. I have no problem with that. And you can choose so many. And so many would truly be educated because most people don't know, Black, white, or otherwise. They just don't know. People in Africa know because they're taught their own history because it is their history. Because they're from there, they're living there, right? So they should know. But it'd be nice if people could see that here. And it'd be nice if the people here who were constantly for the race swap and stuff would also be for telling original stories that already exist from characters that you don't have to make up. They're already in history. But that's really all I gotta say about that. Let me know what you think. Do you think that this would be really cool to be able to see a whole bunch of African figures and not made up ones that are already there, be put to the forefront and be enjoyed by everyone, and that way everyone can kind of have a conversation about how intertwined Africa is with everyone, even well before the slave trade, right? And no, hold on, before I go this is not, I'm not going on this thing because I know a lot of people are going to do this. It's like, oh yeah, like when Black people went to Japan and they were the original samurais, right? And I'm like, no, trust, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going there. I'm just talking about literally Africa. Africa in the continent has literally every phenotype, tons of cultures, and tons of stuff that remains so unexplored that there is no reason to race swap anything. Even if it wasn't historical, but especially when it's historical. All right, that's it. I'm finished. Into the dirt.